Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy. This is a special series on the topic of how to talk policy and influence people. And today I'm joined by Darcia Narvaez from the States. How are you, Darcia?
I'm pretty good here, all things considered. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks too. A little bit chilly. It's been cold lately, but I'm really looking forward to talking to you today, Darcia, about your concept of the evolved nest and what children need for optimal development. But before we get into that, maybe you can just tell me a little bit about yourself and your professional expertise, please.
Sure. My PhD is in educational psychology. I got that in 1993, but I had 6 careers before that.
Wow.
So I'm very interdisciplinary oriented,
Okay.
finding, and I think usually the truth is found in between or the disciplines or in a transdisciplinary area. So I am now, I started, my PhD was in moral development. That was my interest from a young age, living in other countries and seeing kids my own age impoverished, selling gum on the corner, for dinner, money for
Right.
dinner, whatever, just, and then coming back to the States and just couldn't believe the injustice in the world, right? And so my interest has always been about moral or ethics, morality and ethics. And at first, when I started my PhD, I was focused on what people usually study in morality is judgment, reasoning,
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And over the years, I shifted to, for various reasons, to education, classroom, how you help kids develop moral character skills. And then realized after a few years that you actually had to go down into early childhood because the neurobiology of how children are raised is implicated in their morality later.
Mm.
And so that's where I've been focused lately on how early experience shapes your capacities to be compassionate, to be open, to be relationally attuned to others, or the opposite, which is
Mm-hmm.
self-centered and self-protective and bracing against everybody
Yeah.
instead of joining the interpersonal dance that
Yes.
otherwise you are able to do with good care. So,
Okay, well, thank you for that. So I discovered you recently enough on Twitter, which has been a source of all manner of amazing people for me. Actually, I've learned so much from it, and I think it was in relation to some tweet about adverse childhood experiences, and you responded about how it was important to also look at positive, kind of beneficial experiences or what prompts optimal child development. And then I did a bit of reading about the evolved nest and some of your academic articles, but also some of the ones that were not so oriented at a kind of expert audience on psychology today, even on play and attachment. Very interesting stuff. But can you tell me, what is the evolved nest and how does it help foster optimal child development?
right. So every animal has a nest or a developmental system for raising the young that is matched up with their maturational schedule. And so it optimizes normal development. And we have one too. And it's similar to the social mammalian line, which we come out of, which is over 20 million years old, these practices. And ours are slightly different as humans, but otherwise it includes soothing perinatal experience, so soothing a gestational, the pregnant mother's calm and welcoming and has that attitude towards the baby. Then birth is soothing as well and welcoming, and there's no separation of mom and baby. It's no painful procedures, and that baby feels a continuum of being in the womb after birth, because babies are born with only 25% of adult brain volume, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that brain grows in those first few years, and so the experiences they're having is actually shaping how well that brain works. And we also look like fetuses of other animals until 18 months of age. So that's another indicator that a lot of important things happen after birth And so the nest is geared up for providing the right kind of structure of support for the rapidly growing brain that's so quickly growing synapses so fast, we hardly understand it. And if you don't provide the nest, which I'll keep talking about in a moment, you're going to stress that baby in a way, and you don't know what you're stressing, what's being developed at that moment. And then all of a sudden you leave them to cry, you
Right.
leave them alone, untouched. Those systems then stop growing as fast, and other things take the place, right? Stress response kicks in, and that floods the brain with the cortisol, which actually melts the synapses, the connections among neurons that should be growing, and prevents them from growing or melts what's there. I mean, it's just so risky to not provide the nest. And so it's soothing perinatal experiences, also breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
Breast milk provided by the mother is geared up for that baby at that moment. So the saliva of the baby is communicating with the mother's breast, and the mother provides antibodies for infectious agents, provides unique milk if it's a boy or a girl. And it's if there's a growth spurt, there's more fat in the milk. I mean, it's just a magical science laboratory.
Yeah.
And we are our nest that we can. There's 9 components I'm going to tell you about. So I'm on the second one, but we know this nest from what we've anthropologists and others have observed around the world is common in our ancestral way of being, which is nomadic foraging communities. And all over the world, they practice these things that I'm going to mention. So these are the common practices. Of course, every culture is a little unique depending on the landscape where they live and that kind of thing. So breast milk is in these contexts given for at least, on average, 4 years. 4 years.
Okay.
Boom, right? What?
Yeah. It's a long time.
That's because the immune system, we presume one of the reasons is because the immune system takes about 5 years to get to adult levels of functioning. And so the mother's milk has all the immunoglobulins you need to build that system, plus building the brain to function well with well-functioning serotonin receptors and so on. So all the whole body is being constructed by this experience, by having that breast milk, which isn't just food. It's actually a construction system for the body and brain. So breastfeeding, that's the second one. Then there's responsiveness, which means you keep the baby calm. Because they're growing so fast, right? You want to keep all the biochemistry of the baby in this positive state so that the growth goes as it's scheduled to grow. And so in these communities, babies are never put down. Even if the mother or whoever is holding the baby has a big weight on their head, or like if they carry a massive basket or they're going over slippery rocks, the baby is never put down. Babies take priority. And they had they had some intuitive sense, now we have experiments showing why that's important. But then they knew in a way very deeply that it was important to keep babies calm and with you and touched. So touch is another one.
Heart to heart maybe as well, kind of,
Yes, so that skin to skin touch. The babies are, in the womb, their needs are met immediately without any struggle. When they exit the womb, they have to learn how to breathe, and that with the lungs, and that shifts the way the diaphragm works. It has to go in the opposite direction. It takes them a while to learn how to breathe, and so you have to you resonate to the patterns of the people's body that you're on, right? Bodies that you're on, and you learn how to breathe, how to regulate your heart rate, your breathing, your all sorts of systems get dysregulated when you put the baby down. So you want to keep the baby skin to skin as much as possible because of that connection. We're very sensual creatures. We've kind of forgotten that in the Western world, especially.
We kind of have.
And what?
We kind of have, I think. Although we might be remembering it now during the pandemic, that touch is more difficult to come by.
Right, and how much we need it to grow and feel good, So the touch, the affectionate touch, pretty much constant in those first years. And then, in these communities, they're always sitting next to each other in the massive savanna or in the forest, they're holding hands. I mean, there's touch all the time. It's just very tactile kind of
Yeah.
society where you're communicating a lot with your body. You don't have to say the words. Then there's positive climate, so welcoming climate for the child, where they feel supported, the mother feels supported. Mothers who feel supported are more attentive to their children, more responsive to their children. And so the birth and the breastfeeding usually is only the first, well, you're only born once usually. And then the breastfeeding for a few years, right? And then everything else I'm talking about is really for the whole community. We need to
Yeah.
be nested throughout our lives. So the affectionate touch, we need that from our family and friends. We need a positive climate to feel good and welcome, and for us to feel balanced, right?
Hmm.
Then there's play,
Okay.
self-directed, free play, social play. So that's letting, I mean, this is throughout life now, but for young children, it would be playing chase or tag and wrestling, and, and you see mammal animals like puppies and
Yeah.
cats and
So
other
funny.
monkeys play,
Yeah.
right? And then you see them going back and forth, and then you hear because one of them bit too hard or did
Right.
something, right? And so then that one has to pull back, right? In order to keep play going. If they don't pull back, that playmate's going to leave, right? So
Sure.
you learn to be responsive in the play. And in our ancestral communities, the adults even played. So they would have, there's often gender-based contests, for example, like there's
Okay.
I'm forgetting which group it is, but they would have a log that all the women are on this side, or a rope, maybe a pull, either a rope pull, maybe that's a better one, where all the women are on this side and the men are on that side, and they're trying to pull the other group across a line or something, right?
Okay. Right.
And then when the one group starts to lose, people from the other group will come the other side and help that losing group. And then
Nice.
then it's that one's losing. Okay, then people go and help that one. So it's just this big game,
Yeah.
but they're getting out their kind of competitive, whatever, competitiveness in a game that's playful. And so
Yeah.
they spend a great deal of time playing, singing, dancing, that kind of thing, which we're also missing, unfortunately, these days.
Hmm.
So all these things are really build human and maintain human health. Let's see, another one is nature connection. So from
Okay.
birth, you're living with the natural world, animals, plants. You get to know them. You're able to be receptively intelligent, to recognize the signaling that's happening among the animals, the winds. What does that mean? What's happening? And just like the and when there's a tsunami, I don't know if you remember Banda Aceh, I think a few years ago had a tsunami come to this land in the Southeast Asia, and all the animals had fled. There were no animal deaths because they could recognize it before it happened.
They could feel it, right?
They could feel it, right? Whereas the civilized people, well, they didn't know what was happening, right? So they lost their sensory perceptions, right?
Uh-huh.
So we in our civilized worlds, in our communities, have lost a lot of things. We don't realize what we've lost about
Hmm.
being human on the earth. And so being partners with the natural world rather than dominators, which is what our cultures emphasize and say
Yeah.
is normal. It's not normal.
Yeah.
And then the last one is healing practices. So having
Okay.
regular healing practices, and some of these games that I mentioned are part of that. But it's having monthly or weekly, sometimes daily rituals, depending on which community you're talking about, where they let go of those resentments or grudges or whatever it is, and they have shamans or others who help them get into dancing, trancing, or whatever, all
Mm.
sorts of ways of being. I think the Western world has gotten very rigid and narrow in how it thinks a human being should be, and goes into its head,
Yeah.
which is part of what happens when you undercare for a baby. You're not developing what we call the right hemisphere capacities in early life.
Okay.
Those are supposed to grow more rapidly in the first couple of years. Alan Shore's work has just documented this intensively. And when you undercare for a baby, that stuff doesn't grow as well. So you're less self-regulated. You have
Mm.
less empathy. You have less ability to transcend yourself and to feel and recognize the energy and life all around you. And instead, you have to go into your left hemisphere, which is oriented to dead things and categorizing
Right.
and hierarchy and all this stuff. So, and that's where we are, right? Ian McGilchrist, do you know his name?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
The Divided Brain, great book. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So he documented a lot of the research on this. But so what we've done now is we've narrowed ourselves down to very kind of limited human beings, and so I think that's part of the reason we're destroying the planet.
Yeah, that does make sense from what you say in relation to what I've read from some other authors as well, including McGilchrist, and our alienation from nature and kind of our alienation from ourselves and what makes it fun to be human, which is the connection rather than the putting things into categories, let's face it. But so in the West, in America, for example, how, or in Ireland, I can speak to the Irish experience. I breastfed my kids till they were about 7 months, which is a far cry from the, the 4 years from these more ancient cultures or maybe indigenous cultures today. But in your own country, how close to the evolved nest are you these days?
We're the worst in the world.
Oh gosh, okay, yeah.
And you can see the results. We have all sorts of dysregulated, self-centered adults. Greed is predominant, right? And the inability to recognize the diversity is a good thing, or things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's terrible here. We have, the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative.
I don't.
That's the World Health Organization's initiative. They came up with it in the 1990s. And Sweden immediately changed all their hospitals to be baby friendly. And it was only until 2011, I think, the US started to worry about it. But there's 10 practices, and they're mostly about supporting breastfeeding.
Okay.
So not separating mom and baby, not giving infant formula to babies for no medical reason, or sugar water, and helping moms breastfeed and all. In the US at that time, when they first started to worry about it, 2011, only 4% of US hospitals were baby friendly. That means they were separating the moms and babies, giving them sugar water to keep them quiet because they like control in hospitals. And so I think now we're maybe up to 17%. So that's, the whole beginning of a baby's life, right? It's terrible. And infant circumcision, we need to say also, is a terrible thing.
Right, okay.
Child. And we have this documentation now that doctors and nurses pressure parents to get their child circumcised. They make money off the foreskins, so to cosmetic companies and such. So you got to watch what's in your face cream.
Right. Okay. Gosh.
So anyway, so that's I wonder, and I'll just say this as speculation, how many of the angry white men we have in the U.S. have been circumcised? Because that's going to alienate you from your parents already. You're, from the world, you're disconnected.
Yeah. Surely most are, because it was such a common practice 30 or 40 years ago as well. There might be slightly more choice now. But also, breastfeeding is a tricky issue, I think, from a sort of women's rights perspective, and autonomy and bodily integrity. And certainly, I imagine lots of feminists would be taking slight issue with this, even though child rights and maternal rights shouldn't necessarily be in conflict. The other thing in the States, of course, is that women have such paltry maternity leave, so that they are forced back into the workplace when the baby is 6 weeks old, maybe. Right. Surely that can't be conducive to any kind of positiveness, evolved or otherwise.
Correct. That's right. Yeah. So there are women who don't want to breastfeed because they have to go back to work in 6 weeks, right? And they don't want to get too close to their child because they don't want to feel the pain of separation. Well, just think of the poor child, right? So you already have a child who's growing up in a way alienating environment. So there's a lot of misunderstanding of child development, especially in the U.S. I think the Europeans are a little better at the. You guys over there are much more attuned. Here, and I think it's in part because your health care usually is paid by taxpayers.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot because you're trying to save money, not make people sicker. And in
Yeah.
the States, people make money off of people being sick. And
Well, yeah.
so, yeah, and so the incentive is all backwards. And so it doesn't matter if, formula feeding makes the baby more likely to be sick in all sorts of ways. Oh, good, you make money off of it. So, yeah, so there's all the incentives in the States are kind of in the wrong direction, and there's lack of support in so many ways. We have like housing laws where you can have more than one generation in a house, for example. Well, that's crazy, right? Because you
Yes.
need extended family, grandma and grandpa there to take care of the child. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that are need to be fixed.
And the other thing I suppose about the States that has really struck me more and more, I'm married to an American, by the way, and I've spent some time there. So I know many of the lovely aspects of America
Yes.
and the warm welcome I've received, but the rampant individualism and the belief that if I achieve anything in my life, it's because I've strived hard for it and I'm deserving. Not the fact that I've had some kind of nest behind me to support me in the first place. Does that kind of indicate a bit of a rupture with our kind of communitarian nature? The fact that as mammals we evolved to cooperate, and in fact that we can't even really survive on our own, let alone thrive.
Right. Yeah. I think the lack of early support of the mother, especially the parents, and the child then forces them to treat their child distantly, to detach. And so there's all these advisors, how to make your baby sleep through the night alone, because you have to go back to work. So the whole orientation of the society is money making. And so everyone's well-being is, not that important because money is more important, right? And so the child learns, they're on their own. So they develop what we can call a one-person psychology. It's all about them.
Okay.
And so that they're put on that kind of trajectory, and hopefully they make it. A lot of kids, get very ill, mentally ill, or, fall out of the trajectory of, any problem, get into problematic trajectories. So that's, to me, is part of the reason for the individualism being so strong. And then the culture. So there's this bottom-up way of how we become a human being is from our embodied experience, and all our intuitions are built from that. And you can get all sorts of bad intuitions from poor experience, right? So, but then we also have the culture that's a top-down way of reinforcing something or rationalizing something.
Yeah.
So that you rationalize detaching from your child, because then they're going to be independent and make a lot of money, essentially, is the ultimate success. Right. So there's just a whole mess of mixed things going on that it's a lot to talk about. It's very complicated, but
there is indeed. One of the other things that I've become fascinated about, also because I had small kids when I started reading this and had made certain mistakes and bought into certain things along the way, but the importance of our early attachment experiences, and then how, say, a mother's attachment experiences, which she probably won't even remember, that they can kind of be inherited, as can traumatic exposures, that they can be intergenerational. And the thing is, it strikes me that very few people know anything about this. Very few parents know that their attachment styles that their mother had are maybe going to be replicated with their own kids. And if they've had high levels of childhood adversity and haven't dealt with it, then they're quite likely to pass it on. So are there things that we can do to better equip parents to be the best that they can be? you know, by improving their own safety and their health and maybe reducing the stressors in their lives, Darcia?
Yeah, so I talk about this a lot in my writing and elsewhere. First, if you're a kind of, you have to recognize that maybe you get dysregulated, that you get stressed out, right? And you
Sure.
have to recognize that, you know, like, does my jaw getting tight right now? Whoa, this situation makes me stressed.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to start recognizing that. This is what I've done with my students, to have them keep a diary about that.
Okay.
And then practice self-calming. So what is the easiest thing to do is to learn belly breathing, deep belly breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are YouTube videos about how to do that. And to do it at least 6 times, some people say 15 times, but to change your metabolism, calms you down, you know, and to learn to do that when these situations start to arise, and then you build the habit of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. And so it could be that if you're a parent with a child and you're feeling stressed with that child, that you count to 10 or something that helps you get past that high anxiety or high stress. So those are the first one of the steps. And but that's just trying to keep your older survival system brain calm, right?
Right.
You still, if you were left alone in the crib a lot, given an iPad or iPhone, a teddy bear to attach to, right, instead of a real human being, then you've got to build, you've gotten used to just being alone or not, you know, connecting to others. You've got to build then what I call social joy to help yourself learn to really love to be with other people. That's our heritage. That's how we adapted. That's how we survived, right, in the past. But yeah, we've kind of undermined that, and it's not, doesn't forebode well for the future of the species if we don't love to be with other people. So there's ways to do that with play. So in my classes, we would play folk song games.
Okay.
The college students would play with kindergartners because they're just ready to play.
Yeah,
They're not
nice.
so inhibited.
Yeah.
And so ways to bring that back. And so therapists like Dan Siegel talks about couples coming in after their nest is empty, the kids have gone just away, and the woman is ready to, you know, meet the world and do all sorts of new things, and the husband just wants to sit there and, you know, in his man cave and you know, don't bother me. And he says that's a sign that the right hemisphere needs to be revamped, right? Because boys, you know, mature more slowly and need much more of the nest when they're young, and we tend to give them much less.
So
the
interesting.
right hemispheres are not as well developed, which is about flexibility and openness and attunement. If that's not grown well, you go into the dominator, you know, kind of dominant submission orientation, because that's the old stuff you're born with. So if you don't grow the stuff after birth, you're going to go to the stuff that's innate. Anyway, he says what he recommends to these husbands then is to take a dance class, a painting class, something where you have to be in the present moment, because that, in a creative way, that grows the right hemisphere still in adulthood. I recommend play mostly more. It's easier, I think, because it breaks through the ego defenses otherwise that that are harder to get through. And that would be with kids. Play with a young child, get into that, and it might take some practice, right, to let go and be yourself and be silly.
Yeah. One thing that strikes me there as you speak about the artistic pursuits is that when I was researching with prisoners, a lot of them mentioned getting very interested in arts and singing and drama when in prison, and when they strangely felt a safety there that had been sadly lacking elsewhere in the community. You know, now Irish prisons are not of the same level as in the States, you know, in terms of the destruction that they reap. They're not great either, but it just meant that the men were so unsafe in their childhoods and growing up that they couldn't enjoy they couldn't afford to play, really. They had to focus on survival. But in terms of policy making then, Darcia, are there things that the governments in any particular nation can do to promote optimal child development? And simple things, you know?
Okay, I'm not a policy person, but
Yeah.
I throw out some ideas from other people, and one would be paid parental leave,
Okay.
and I would 3 years of it.
3
maybe
years. Okay.
Yeah, decreasing maybe pay. I think Sweden has something similar to that. Then having milk banks, like you said, not all women want to breastfeed or can or feel comfortable with it, probably because they were not well nurtured with touch when they were young, and so their body is just, their vagus nerve just goes, ooh, or whatever it is. Biologically, they have problems or challenges. So I would have milk banks and pay, I don't know, this is kind of radical, pay lactating women who have lots of milk, pay them to share their milk.
Kind of like the wet nurses from the past kind of thing.
Yes, yes. Now, I mean, there's all sorts of issues with that, but that kind of thing needs to be done to support the babies for as long as possible, and to stop. But we have a problem. The world, there is in 1984, I think, the World Health Organization, there was an agreement to not have advertising of infant formula anywhere. But that's been eroded by the World Trade Organization and other trade pacts, where a corporation can go into a country and declare them violating the trade pact, and which happened with Guatemala. Guatemala didn't want Gerber baby formula to have the picture of a baby on it because it made it look attractive, right? And the point, but they lost because of the WTO, the World Trade Organization's power. So countries don't have jurisdiction over what corporations can do in many cases, and that needs to change too. So infant formula should not be advertised, right? And some countries are able to still keep it on the shelf in the back or something, but not in the US. In the US, again, corporations have a lot of power to control our minds. The media does too, and so it's just not very well controlled here, because money making, again, is the primary focus of the country. So if we think of well-being instead as the primary focus, then I think things fall into place about what needs to be done. You need to support families so that they can care for their children. The wages need to be high enough so they can do that. One wage earner should be able to bring in enough money to support the family. There needs to be affordable housing so they can do that. Multi-generational housing. There needs to be playgrounds and free play, assumed to be normal for childhood. In the States, we've taken recess out of elementary school, primary school. We have laws that kids cannot be out of the vision of their parents playing.
Right.
In the park or something, right? And if the parent's not there, the parent can be slashed with some fine or something, slapped with some fine. So we have all this weird stuff going on, all these anxious adults, and they can't recognize play. It looks like aggression. Oh, I'm gonna kick you out of school because you did that. But that was just play. And if you don't play, you forget how to play. And maybe you're aggressive at first because you don't know how to play. You didn't grow up with it. And so you got to learn how to play, and adults have now gone the other direction.
A bit of rough and tumble never hurt anyone. It's true, and even when I think back to when I was a child, we had so much more freedom. We'd go mountain climbing and down the rocks and fishing and be gone for hours. I would be terrified to leave my two off, because again, that sort of risk averse approach to parenting, I think, has crept in lots of places. And of course, bad things did happen in the past with neighbors or, children hurting themselves, but there was a nicer freedom. And I suppose as well, the kind of role of the village in keeping an eye on kids, that part of the evolved nest, the fact that you actually knew your neighbors maybe, which we've lost a lot of the time.
Yes, and I think I forgot to mention that allo parents or allo mothers, other mothers, caring for the child is part of that nest. And so
Right.
we used to, when I was a child too, there were, the neighbors would kind of be watching out for the gang of kids wandering around just to make
Yeah.
sure they're not getting into trouble.
I think it exists still among some populations. For example, the wider family, it can still be very, very important for African immigrants in Ireland. The big collective, which seems very nice and fun. And I mean, possibly in the States with the very diverse cultures that you have there, it probably still is stronger with some populations than others. But do you think there's truth in the fact that the idea of Western success does not necessarily value this greater emphasis on collectivity in some cultures? That it might view it as kind of quaint, or just not understand the fact that it has very important functions in terms of health and well-being.
Well, I think the Western culture used to have that notion, but I think it's capitalism that split everything up because they
Right.
make more money when they have the teen watching their own television and the parents watching the television, the child watching their own video, whatever it is. They make more money when they split up interests, right? And
Wow.
then it's also, the experiences we have shape our intuitions about what's good.
Yeah.
And so when you have different people watching different things, they're not going to agree as well either. And so that's capitalism loves it.
Yeah.
In a way, capitalism loves to split up needs, but then it likes to impose sameness. So
Right.
now in the country, in the States, wherever you go in small towns, they all kind of look alike now because they
Right.
have the same little mall that looks the same as every other place and the same chain restaurants or whatever it is. So there's something about capitalism that just wants to eliminate diversity.
Yeah.
In the Western culture too right now. Eliminate diversity, white supremacy, that's it. We know the best for you. You do what, that's colonialism. It's been going on for hundreds of years. So.
It certainly is quite grim, all right. But also in terms of my reading from things that are helpful for healing trauma are to do with the collective and feeling safe again in our body around other people, rhythmic dancing, drumming, sometimes storytelling, but getting together in a group. And even I've done coherent breathing myself in a group, and the energy flow is an amazing thing. It's much better in a group than on my own. But the West wouldn't necessarily elevate these forms of learning necessarily. Do you think, Darcia, that it is important for public policymakers and human service providers to be neurodevelopmentally aware and trauma responsive and aware about attachment and its importance at every stage of our life?
Right, and also child development and how the brain needs touch. I mean, the brain development needs touch and responsive care throughout, not punishing, not spanking. That shifts the trajectory in the wrong direction. So not harshness, but to not be harsh, parents have to be supported. When they get stressed, they might be harsh, right? Because they were treated that way. And the animal studies show that if you've had a poor nurturing mother, as a daughter, the daughter's worse as a mother. And so it gets worse over generations. And I think that's what's happened in the States because of the lack of support. The other thing is the importance I forgot to mention earlier. So you want to self-calm, you want to build social joy in some of the ways that you mentioned too, right? To breathe together, to dance together, all that is just, that's what we need. And then you also have to train and revamp your imagination, because our imaginations in the Western world have really been narrowed down to, success, European white supremacy ways. Western
Yeah.
ways are the best. It's progress. And individualism. Oh yes, that's part of progress.
Yeah.
All that crazy stuff, and you have to really revamp and learn about other cultures, but also revamp in terms of the natural world, that we are
Yes.
partners to the world, not dominators, and learning about how intelligent all these other life forms are, and they know stuff. They can do things we cannot do as humans. We're not the smartest, right? To learn and to, but it's going out and building your nature connection, going to find a sit spot outside and get to know that place and let the
Mm.
animals and get to know you and talk to the plants. I mean, there's all
Sure.
sorts of ways to do things to bring you back down to earth. Instead of floating above the earth, like, doesn't matter where you are in the Western culture, it kind of doesn't matter. You could be on the moon and have all these crazy ideas of separation and individualism and progress. We're on the earth.
Yeah.
Come on, get back to the earth. Love the earth. That's how we're going to survive as a species. If we don't get back to loving the earth, we're gone.
Well, indeed, it's so true. Over the years as well in my prisoner research, that came up as a thing, engaging with horticulture, growing plants from saplings to, bigger plants, and also raising cattle were things, or even rescuing dogs seemed to help people.
Yes.
Maybe activate their social engagement system or feel safe with nature before reaching out to humans, which is very interesting because I suppose part of the silo mentality, again, the left brain putting things in categories, is not always joining the dots or the connections between one aspect and the other. Not everyone is interdisciplinary in their approach, like yourself, Darcia. But in relation to culture and race, and you've alluded to some of the issues in the States at the moment, and the Capitol being stormed just recently, and white supremacy, and how quite a different outcome might have happened if it had been Black Lives Matters protesters. They wouldn't have gotten near the building. But in terms of healing now, how important, or why is it important that individuals within services and systems and institutions in the United States and elsewhere, everywhere else where there's been colonialism, that they're respectful of culture and race if they want to respond more effectively to trauma?
Yes, it's very important. It does take some experience, though, to be responsive. I mean, you need to have someone who is of the culture that you're partnering with.
Okay.
William Easterly wrote a book some years ago. I think it was called White Man's Burden. And talks about all the money that's been sent around the world from Europe and the United States to help other countries, has done more damage than good.
Yeah.
Billions and billions of dollars, in part because the Westerners come in and they think they know everything, right? And you do it this way. And they don't know the local landscape. They don't know the local community, the culture and all. And it just wreaks havoc instead, disrupts things instead of helping. So it's really important to partner with people who know that particular place where you are trying to help, and not assume that whatever your disciplines, even the disciplines ethics, but the disciplines knowledge is going to be, perfectly useful in that circumstance in the way that you've applied it somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really tricky in a way to be culturally sensitive, and you need to have some guidance by some wise elders in that community to help you do it well.
And another thing that I've become really fascinated about in the last while is kind of the role of the community. So I think it's very linked to the evolved nest, really, in the sense that we might be part of a family or not anymore, depending on what's happened. But we need supports. And the state can do so much for us in terms of maybe helping us with services or whatever that we might need. But what role do you think local communities or small neighborhoods have in, let's say, helping a struggling single mom, you know, who's working round the clock to provide for her little kids? Does the community have a role in buffering her to create better health and well-being for the family as a whole, Darcia?
Yes, I think so. I always think of China, at least in the old days, used to have a nurse on every block, every apartment block or something, who was there to help families nurture their kids,
Mm-hmm.
keep things in balance. And I think that's really important now. One of the problems in the States is there's so much mobility.
Mm.
So people get thrown out of their apartment and then they go to some other place. And so the kids are always moving. It's hard to keep track, right? And in the States, the idea that you pull yourself up by your bootstraps is
Yes.
illusion. It's all an illusion or delusion. And the racism. So there's a book called Dying from Whiteness, where
Right.
this medical doctor went to find out why the rural Americans would not want health care. And it's because for everybody, because they don't want those people to have it, which
Oh,
means
wow.
Black people, right? Minorities, Blacks, immigrants. So there's a kind of a built-in resentment. But that's been in the States from the beginning because the white elites wanted their power. And so they would tell the poorer whites, well, at least you're better off than those people, right? So there's just been this story. So I think we have to get through some of the racism, and at least here, and get back to a sense of oneness, that we are all Americans or we are all Irish, no matter what our background or who we are, and open the orientation of love and
Yes.
support to others. And I think communities is where it should start, in the local community.
Have you witnessed any in your work or in research trips, wounded communities managing to self-heal, Darcia? And if you have, how have they gone about this?
I haven't personally experienced that. Because I'm more of a researcher, but I think there are ways that Native peoples are coming now into their own, and they're taking up their self healing in many ways. So I think finding your ancestral traditions, wherever that is, wherever they are, and trying to implement them is a way to actually self-heal, to connect to your ancestors. You're here because your ancestors brought you here. You are loved through this line of people, right? And so honor them. And in Native communities, they're alive too. Because the right hemisphere is so well developed, you're able to communicate in a way with the higher spiritual realm. But we've kind of lost that in the Western mind. But to stay connected to the ancestors and they want you to survive. They want you to thrive, and to bring that into the healing. Native communities do this a little bit better, but we could all do that. And we can bring in our own homes a respect for the ancestors, having an altar where you have the pictures of your past loved ones who have passed, and other symbols of how important you are to be respectful of the ancestors, of your relationships now, the web of life in which you're connected. Everything we do is affecting the web of life. We have relationships with the trees, we have a lot of squirrels in our yard and birds. And everyone you meet, you are affecting them, and to remember that. So the healing is coming from remembering you as yourself as a fountain of love towards others, right? So I think the communities that are helping us do that, where you have to calm down and and get back to center. And then you can open up and connect to others and to be yourself, because you're unique. Everyone's unique
Mm,
with a gift. You see things that other people don't see. You understand something that others don't understand, and that's your gift to the
mm,
world, whether it comes from trauma yourself that you've
mm,
worked through or some other talent you have. It's our responsibility to be ourselves
mm,
and to connect with others. So I talk about how there's kind of two ways all day long. We want to be balanced, but there's two ways to go into imbalance all day long. We can feel superior in this moment, and oh, I
right.
don't relate to you, and you're kind of bracing against these people
Yeah.
because I'm better and I know more, whatever it is. And to get back to balance, you've got to realize, oh, no, I don't know everything. And the ego has to be tamp down the ego, right? And then
Yeah.
a little pain, and then you come back and realizing you need other people. You need you need to be connected. You need relationships. The other way to fail, moment to moment, is to feel inferior.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you know more than I. I don't know anything, and you kind of go hide from being yourself. That's not helpful either, right? And so you have to painfully realize, oh, I have a responsibility to bring my gifts to the world.
Mm,
And every moment you can go one way or the other, but then come back to balance in where you are tuned up to others that you're
mm,
with. You're tuned into yourselves, um, your deeper self, communicating with the energies of the world coming in, and you're in the flow of life, and then you can let that flow go through you and toward
mm,
others. So it's this loving. It's very. It sounds mystical to us, but it's just normal for our species
mm.
in these other communities.
It does sound mystical, but as I mentioned, had we had this conversation 5 years ago, I'd have been a lot less receptive to some of it. I might have thought, oh, a bit dippy hippie, or not, I suppose, not rational enough, because of the top down cortical. We're reasonable, we're rational. This is just a bit cookie. But having experienced movement medicine and things which call on the wise and well ancestors, and there's a whole other line of ancestral medicine, and I know Thomas Hubel does a lot on collective trauma and tapping back into the wisdom of previous generations. There seems to be a lot more of it finding its way into, I suppose, circles that are interested in trauma and healing. But there's so many people in the world who are cut off, unfortunately, from this information. Might there be merit in teaching some of these practices in schools, do you think,
Oh,
Darcia?
yes, that would be great. I know there are some practices that have entered schools, mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
or deep breathing. Um,
Yoga in some places.
I'm sorry?
Yoga as well, I think,
Yoga,
in some
yes,
places.
yes. So the window is opening, right?
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of resistance, I think, because the adults themselves, if they're so stressed, it's really hard to be open when you're stressed. The
Mm,
blood flow shifts away from your higher order thinking. That's just what happens to mobilize you for action, right?
mm-hmm.
You're not going to be very open and flexible, open-hearted, open-minded. So we somehow have to get the adults calmed down so
Mm,
that they, the ones who are doing the instructing or setting up institutions or running them,
mm,
are more calm so they can actually use their whole brain, an
mm.
integrated brain, rather than just sort of this um, planning, deliberative mind.
We're running out of time now, and I appreciate all the great things that you've shared with me. But on play as well, a barrier to play, it strikes me, in adulthood is our kind of, again, the ego, not wanting to seem silly or foolish, and not actually realizing that there's great joy sometimes in being silly. Theater or role play, there can be, such fun in taking on different personas and being ludicrous and daft. How can we get beyond that kind of defensiveness of, I'm not comfortable being seen in anything other than a highly professional, competent light?
Yeah, it's a challenge, I know. One of the things I think that little kind of mini steps to do is to play charades.
Okay.
because you have to act out something for just a few moments, right? And it's very structured. You know, you're acting out a book, name of a book or a name of a movie or something. And you have to convey that through action, not words. So it's enlisting your right hemisphere. And it's not as threatening as, you know,
Yeah.
playing tag, I suppose. Or
Yeah.
chase.
Just one very final one then, Darcia. I've recently started working on a project to do with youth justice. And so the young people who will be part of the pilot project, you know, would have grown up with difficult situations. Often there'll be very much less than optimal child development, attachment issues, highly stressed communities, poverty, unemployment, all that type of thing. Can you give any bit of guidance in how people working with young people who are engaged in drug-related crime and that type of thing can engage with them to maximize, I suppose, the chances of relational health and growth, and you know, that the kids can maybe be better equipped to reach their potential?
I think the most important thing is developing a trusting relationship,
Okay.
because they probably didn't develop that, and they have just basic distrust, which happens when you have insecure attachment.
Mm-hmm.
You just distrust people, and so it takes a long time to develop that trust. Marilyn Watson talked about a classroom of second and third grade students with a teacher. She got to stay with them for 2 years, thankfully, but there were the students that came in distrustful. It took a long time for that teacher, with her developmental discipline, not punishment, but helping them grow their character in ways that were respectful and of their dignity. It took them a while to develop trust in that teacher, but they did. So it takes probably a year or more
Mm-hmm.
to do that. And so you don't want rotating members of the staff. You want the
Okay.
same staff members with the same student who, or young person who stays with them. Part of the problem with our charity work with young people, helping young people, is they come in and out, right? It's for one semester or one year, and then they're gone forever, right? That's not helpful for a child who's been traumatized. They need consistency. So I would emphasize that first. And then the other thing is the drama and the play.
Okay.
Get them into that, because that can do a lot of healing, as you've said.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Darcia, thank you so much for sharing all this great information with me, and thank you for the wonderful work you're doing. It's so important and fascinating. This has been How to Talk Policy and Influence People with me, Jane Mulcahy, and my guest today was Darcia Narvaez, talking about the evolved nest and related matters. Thank you so much, Darcia. Stay safe and well.
You too.
Bye.